Welcome to Rally Iberia, guys. This is the next rally location following on from Kenya, where my previous official WRC video was about Kenya, where I only got, I think, 5 or 6 out of the total bloody stages done. I ran out of time. It was actually a race against the time for the shut-off for the whole club, basically. I'll link that above so you can check it out. Pretty cool. But this one, we got into Iberia. So straight off the bat, man, this is going to be a WRC 2 event. Then after this is another Iberia, but it's a WRC class, so back to back, pretty interesting. But I'll be completely upfront with you guys. I'm not the quickest on asphalt or tarmac. Pretty new. If you follow my page, you know I don't post any road stages really. I prefer dirt. But anyway, this is a whole learning curve for me and you to join together and just see how we go and follow on my progress throughout the year. See how we can even learn some new skills and just try and place well, man. So basically what we're going to do, we're going for the Toyota GR Yaris Rally 2, which is a WRC 2 class with 300 bhp, 1600 cc's, 3 cylinder, so only a tiny little motor, but 1230 kg, so the power to weight is there. And to be honest with you guys, these cars aren't that much slower than the big boy WRC class, so pretty interesting, man. I had a lot of fun in this one, and as I said before, man, this is just me learning some new skills, sharing with you guys my highs, my lows, and just gonna see how we actually end up at the end of the event. So throughout every stage, before we go in and after, I'm gonna do a bit of narration over the top to give you guys a bit of my thoughts, feelings, how it went, you know, things I found interesting in the stage, and yeah, man, treat this as a complete 2025 WC recap. So with that, let's rip into the first stage. So, stage 1, I decided not to do a shakedown event. Just gonna run it pretty blind. Gonna get a general good feel for the car and just the stages and just see how it all works out, man. This is just a bit of fun. Not treating it very serious, but as I said, gonna give it a bit of a go. Stage 1 of 12 is Campdasens, which is 9.7 kilometers. We are in a nice sunshiny state of weather here, and if all in all goes well, should be a pretty good stage, man. Car's feeling pretty good so far, if I'm honest. The tune I did was just something I've copied off a different page, but yeah, to be honest, running it blind, using the cockpit review here as well. We're going to try and see what that feels like, but inevitably I do switch to the hood cam because I'm just a bit more consistent and a bit more quicker. Don't know what it is with me, but for this event and this car, I felt a lot more safer, I'd say. So with that, let's rip in, see how we go, and I will join you at the end of the stage. So bringing stage 1 to a close. So pretty good, man. A few mistakes here and there, a couple of crashes, but we got 336th on the leaderboard here, or the current standings. So pretty good with that. Running into stage 2 of 12, which is a Montagut, which is 1.2 k's in length. Another sunny, beautiful day here in Iberia. Really putting some pace down now. I think I got a bit of false confidence from that first stage, and yeah, we'll see how it pans out anyway. But yeah, let's rip through these little skinny roads and yeah, just figure out this whole tarmac thing, boys. It's so far so good anyway. That false confidence I was talking about, there we go. Our first and only DNF for the event, I'm happy to say. So we actually get into our first service area here. Decide to repair the gearbox, then I move over to the differential. Not too sure exactly what I'm going to do really, but I'm thinking maybe the lights in case it's a night stage next, but still new to the rally, so I'm trying to get used to how to read the next stage, the best ideas and, you know, strategies moving forward, so still new. I do go over time here unfortunately, but to be honest, a little bit isn't too much, I hoped, but I really don't know. We'll see towards the end of the stage, or stages. Still on we're on day 2 now, stage 4 or 12, which is Santa Cruz. This one is an afternoon stage, or early morning maybe, one or the other, but we do use our lights, so try and conserve them if we can, and really giving this one really flat out, man, honestly. We're going pretty hard. Switch to the hood viewer for this one as well, just feeling a bit more confident with it. But yeah, carrying a little bit of damage coming to the stage, but nothing major as yet, but we'll see how we go. This one was a bit of a hard pill to swallow. After doing such a pretty good run, man, we binned it right towards the end of the stage. But, you know, all in all, we still got 449th on the current standing of the leaderboard for that stage, so pretty good. Stage 5 of 12 is Leo Guitarra. We, well, to be honest, didn't do too bad here, really. Some big mistakes coming up, as you'll see, but we are running a bit of a high temperature in the car, so trying to be a little bit mindful of that. But to be honest with you, I'm pretty much giving it pretty much flat out, man. Which you'll see, I blow out a few corners, but as I said, still getting used to the tarmac stages, man. Such a massive step out of my comfort zone, and you know, I'm pretty happy to share it with you guys as well, because it's something that most guys I'd say would only really post their stuff they're really good at on their YouTube pages. So, you know, I'm all about just being genuine and upfront. So, yeah, highs and lows, as I said, boys. One DNF already, but potentially we may not get any more, but got to start being a little bit smarter with how I try to attack these stages. And towards the end of the stage now, two major mistakes there. So we actually placed 988th on the current standings there. To be honest, not too bad. Going into stage 6 of 12, which is Montclar, 6.3 kilometers I believe, still carrying that high temp, so car's not performing at its 100% best, but to be honest, either am I. So this one, I'm going to try and a bit safer, because that last place really annoyed me, if I'm honest. You know, I'm sort of just getting into the feel of things now, understanding how the grip levels are with these cars on these stages, and yeah, just trying to basically connect with the car a little bit more. As you'll see, as we increase through the stages, or progress rather, my confidence is a lot more, and I'm just picking some just better lines in general, to be honest. Hey, really trying to approach it as if it's a racing car type of thing and not a rally. That was one thing that really helped me change my mindset, you know. Come into a corner wide, through the apex in the middle, and on wide on the outside, whereas before you sort of cut in as a rally driver, you know, you try and drift in, so line choice is very different. So that's what's helped me with this stage, and my placings sort of gradually improve over each event, so happy with that. So rounding out this stage, we had a bit of heartbreak there, man. Coming into that bridge way too hot and just getting smacked on that arm car rail. Depressing to say the least. You know, as I was going for the stage, I was feeling good and it crept up with my speeds. Wasn't good. 945th on the end of that stage there. So a bit annoying, man. So we're going to change the vehicle setup now. I'm noticing it's 100% asphalt in the rain. So we're going to switch over to the asphalt rain tyres for this. See, actually learning and paying attention now, guys. So something new is learnt every day. But vehicle repairs, man, not good. So what we're going to do, I'm thinking bodywork is probably a priority because you really want the lights to work properly. But then I just go across to radiator. So I'm thinking the heat issue, fix that, fix the exhaust issue, and maybe the lights. The bodywork isn't too bad. Steering is obviously going to be very, very, very important for this. And then also I'm thinking, well, hey, engine as well should be good and hopefully a good fix. We do go over in time again, but at this point, man, there's 2 really bad results in the stages. You know, we're not going to be high at the end, so what is what it is. 7 of 12 now, which is Les Irles or Irines. Not too sure how to say that one, but yeah, believe it or not, going to this my first wet stage, this is actually my best event of the entire championship. This one, crazy. Hey, someone who doesn't even do asphalt or something, you know, I seem to perform the best in the rain. Don't even know how I did this so well, but just trying to really listen to my mind here and just say, hey, come on now, cool it, let's just dig in. This is a marathon, not a sprint, so don't get crazy. But, you know, in saying that, I think the wet stage actually helps my driving style a little bit. I'm more comfortable being a little bit sideways and, you know, trying to pick a smooth line through a corner for some reason for me is just, I find that harder than sliding into a corner. I don't know what it is, my mind is just backwards, I think. But anyway, let's rip in and, yeah, I will join you at the end of the stage. rounding out the stage, man, and hey, honestly, I was freaking shocked how good that went. Just felt really good, and the car's feeling really, really comfortable now. 319th on the stage I didn't even know, ran it blind. Gotta be happy with that, man. One of the longest stages now, which is stage 8, Alforja, which is just under 20 k's in length. This is a big boy, man. Very, very, very lengthy, and we're actually running backwards the stages I've just previously done, so don't know at all what to expect, but just gonna give it a good go, man. Trying to get into the mindset of the game where it's a marathon, not a sprint, but it's very hard after that last stage because I was just feeling so amped up and just so happy about the result, which is not a very good mindset to start a stage off with. But hey, wet stage, a little bit more confident like this, so let's see where we place at the end of this stage. So, with that, we got some wild aerodynamics, man, that we could make to a wheelie if we wanted to with that much downforce on the rear end. Nah, seriously, 615th, 2 big mistakes there, which actually stopped us, had to reverse, and yeah, is what it is. Stage 9 to 12 is Botareli, 7.3 k's in length, and the third and final wet stage for the 2025 Rally Iberia WRC 2 event. So coming in, gonna really try and just slow the hell down, man. I'm really trying to just milk as much as I can to these corners, but going in blind, that's what's catching me out. I'm just getting caught by those random little things that stick out in corners or odd angles, or you know, just stuff that can catch a noob out, which is me, a noob. So let's get to the end of this one, see what result we can get, and hopefully not crash would be really, really nice. So coming towards the end, a lot cleaner of a run, man. Just dialing it back seems to be the key. So very interesting. We get 496th on the current standings for the leaderboard here. Moving into our next service event. So we're going to change to asphalt medium because there's no more rain stages, as it says on the bottom left there. This is 100% asphalt in the heat. Repairs. So first thing we want to look at, can only do replacement parts here because it's so bad. So we've gone bodywork is the next one. We're going to change up to the lights because depending on the time in the morning or the end of the afternoon, we may need them. So not too sure, man. Deciding that suspension is probably a priority as well, and to be honest, the turbo, we need the power and we need handling as well. Brakes is another priority as well. And with a little bit more time, I decide, clutch, radiator, what should I do? Not too sure. But heating is always an issue, so we choose radiator. Come under the time for the first time in the event, so that's always a good thing. We're learning how to manage times and see what does what, and yeah. Stage 10 of 12, which lists Voltus 8.9 Ks in length, and this one, man, we come out swinging. Really feeling confident with the car. Really just get into a very nice state of mind in this one, and we are absolutely hooking, man. This had the potential, and when I say had, it had the potential to be the fastest stage I've done, but as you see right towards the end, I freaking clipped the edge of a cliff for a bit of a rocky bank there, and it's game over. Not a DNF, but not the result we needed. So enjoy this one because this is probably my most enjoyable one to date in these stages. Yeah, unfortunate is not even the word, man. I'd like to swear right now, but probably shouldn't. But still get 457th. So to be honest, yeah, as I see in my hand there, bugger. Day 4, stage 11, 12 is Aiguamurcia. Butchered that. But this one, very, very cool and quite a different change up in scenery and road texture or road base, which inevitably does catch me out in this one. This seems to get some, not tarmac, but I'd even say concreted sort of sections, and the grip level seriously reduced, so it does catch me out, unfortunately. But I'd really like to learn this stage because it just felt really, really cool. Hey, had a really good time, and yeah, man, this is a cool one for Iberia. Anyway, enjoyed it. approaching the end now, and hey, pretty good run, man. A few mistakes here and there, obviously, but for not knowing the track, I was happy with that. 337th, so hey, pat on the back for that one. The final stage, stage 12, is Pontils, 9.7 k's in length, and you know what I decided between you, me, and the gatepost? Let's give this one absolutely hell. So I go out absolutely swinging, really trying to prove something to no one, as it turns out. But yeah, the worst mindset you can have in a rally event, I can tell you right now. So you'll see what happens, but yeah, we go to full attack mode and we get attacked ourselves. So, coming to the finish line of the final event of Rally Iberia, and you know what? I had a freaking fun, man. I really enjoyed this. We got 330th on the standings, which the overall leaderboards for Iberia Rally event number 4 of 16, we got 888. Pretty wild, man. Gonna go for the complete points secured, or when my standings is for the entire field or the entire leaderboard for this club, which has thousands and thousands. I think there was over 7,000 people competing in this or something. I believe I scrolled to the end. I'm not too sure what I did actually now, but I really had a great time. I really did, man. And I highly encourage you guys, man, if you haven't done this type of event, which is an actual proper championship, have a crack, man. I'm actually at 3,381st with 1,211 points. So we're above halfway in the field, but I missed the first, 2 events. Got half of Kenny done, and this is my first thing. So 7,520 complete entries for this. So we're in above the top half anyway. So freaking yeah. But like I was saying, I had a freaking ball, man. I really enjoyed it. I really did. So with this, it rounds out Iberia for the WRC 2 class. Next up is WRC 1, so the fast ones, and now I have a bit of a knowledge of how the cars actually feel. I'm a bit more confident. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be a bit more confident with the next one. I'm going to try and do a complete breakdown again, so we're going to do an whole hour length video again, because like, I just had fun. I enjoyed it. So if you can, consider it a like. It really helps the video. I know it's freaking cringe, but it really does help me and helps project this video out into the masses. And you know, and if I do earn with my YouTube revenue, it goes back into the stream or back into the equipment. Like as it is now, I got one of my first paychecks from YouTube. I've literally just straight away invested into, you know, a better upgrade for quality, being I've got a 4K webcam coming, so gonna get a lot more better, clearer vision for you guys, and be able to have 3 cameras running, so a bit more involvement, a bit more stuff to see for you guys at home. So yeah, just know that whatever you guys do, whether it be a like, a comment, or even a watch, generally do appreciate it, and it really does help me going into upgrade stuff for you guys at home inevitably. So with that, take it easy. Catch you guys in the next one, which will be WRC 1, the quickest cars, and I hope we can be a bit more consistent and not have such weird crashes and DNFs. That'd be nice. Cheers, guys.